Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources. Following are the news which have been reported by American, Canadian, European, Asian, African, Australian channels and also by news agencies AFP, AP and Reuters. Now the headlines. Pro-Palestinian protests are spreading in American colleges' campuses. Hush money trial of Donald Trump, a key witness takes stand in New York court. Ethnic violence and elections in largest democracy, India. Aid bill for Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan is in US Senate. Israel strikes northern and southern Gaza after giving warning for evacuation. Hezbollah of Lebanon and Israel continue fighting. Yesterday, Hezbollah fired a rocket which went inside 10 miles Israeli territory. Norway asked donors to resume donations for Palestinian refugees for United Nations organization UNRWA. Russian court rejected American appeal. 5 migrants died crossing English Channel. British Parliament approved bill deporting illegal immigrants to Rwanda. Migrants in southern Paris. Labor rules in Supreme Court. TikTok sale or ban. On Wall Street, Nasdaq, Dow Jones Industrial, S&P 500 all went up. Now the news in detail.
Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. College campuses in several parts of the country are struggling tonight with just where to draw the line between allowing protests and free speech and preventing anti-Semitism and intimidation. As the school year nears its end, Columbia University announced it would stay on a hybrid schedule until the end of the spring semester next week, and students were arrested at New York University last night. Police arrested more than 100 people at NYU as the turmoil that has roiled Columbia over the past week spreads to other schools.
It's a really outrageous crackdown by the university to allow the police
for all university campuses, and had the students adhere to those guidelines, things would have gone much differently.
Dr. Andrew R. Marks is chair of the Department of Physiology and Cellular Biophysics at Columbia University. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
In the day's other headlines, the U.S. Senate advanced a bill this afternoon to send billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Final passage is expected later tonight or tomorrow. In all, it contains $95 billion in support, with $61 billion dedicated to Ukraine. Today, the Pentagon clarified where those funds would go.
This security assistance package will be based on Ukraine's most urgent needs. Again, without getting into details, I think it's a good assumption to expect that it'll include air defense capabilities as well as artillery ammunition.
The Associated Press is reporting that Pentagon officials stand ready to send an initial $1 billion military aid package to Kyiv. That will happen as soon as the broader measure goes through. Israel ordered new evacuations of northern Gaza today as it carried out a wave of strikes throughout the Strip. Smoke was seen rising over central and southern areas of Gaza as residents reported nonstop bombardments. Separately, the Israeli military released footage of what it claims were strikes against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. The Iran-backed group has clashed with Israel since the start of the war in Gaza. Hezbollah, in turn, says it launched a drone attack 10 miles inside Israel, its deepest incursion to date. Norway is calling on international donors to resume payments to UNRWA, that's the UN agency for Palestinian refugees. It comes after an independent review released yesterday found that Israel provided no evidence to support accusations that UNRWA employees were linked to terrorist groups. UNRWA officials say those findings should be enough for countries to end the freeze on funding.
I hope that with this report and the measure we will be putting in place, that the last group of donors will get the necessary confidence to come back as a donor and partner of the agency.
A separate internal UN investigation is still looking into Israel's allegations that UNRWA staffers were involved in the October 7th attacks. The U.S. is among those who paused funds to the agency back in January. A Moscow court has rejected the latest appeal from American journalist Evan Gershkovich. That means the Wall Street Journal reporter will remain in Russian detention through the end of June. Gershkovich appeared in court today with his lawyers to seek an end to his pretrial detention. He was arrested in March of last year on espionage charges. The 32-year-old was seen to be in good spirits, at one point making a heart-shaped gesture with his hands. Gershkovich denies the allegations against him. 5 migrants died today as they tried to cross the English Channel from France to the UK. Among them was a 7-year-old girl. Officials say their overcrowded boat hit a sandbank off the coast of northern France. Their deaths came hours after the British Parliament approved a bill to deport migrants who enter the UK illegally to Rwanda. Aid groups warn the measure will do more harm than good.
We will not see the boat stop because of this. We will see more deaths. We will see more dangerous risks being taken. But yeah, it definitely won't act as a deterrent. Nothing else has. So I don't know why people are thinking that this will.
More than 6,000 people have made the perilous journey to Britain so far this year on small, often overloaded boats. Police in France today cleared migrants from a makeshift camp in Paris less than 100 days before the Summer Olympics get underway there. In a pre-dawn operation, authorities evicted dozens of teenage boys and young men from West Africa. Many of them were in the process of seeking official residency. Aid groups say officials are ramping up what they call a social cleansing campaign ahead of the Olympics.
All the campments in Paris are getting evacuated by the police because they want to have a clean place for the Olympic Games, for the tourists. They don't want to see Paris as a city that is full of migrants.
Last week, police evicted hundreds of migrants from France's biggest squatter camp south of the capital. The Federal Trade Commission voted today to ban so-called non-compete agreements for most employees. That means companies can no longer bar workers from taking jobs with their competitors. According to the FTC, 30 million people, or 1 in 5 workers, are currently subject to such restrictions. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has said it will sue to block the measure. On Wall Street today, markets closed higher after some strong corporate earnings. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 263 points to close at 38,503. The Nasdaq jumped 245 points. The S&P 500 added nearly 60. And still to come on the News Hour, the U.S. Supreme Court hears a case that has major implications for labor relations. Congress passed a bill forcing TikTok's Chinese parent company to sell or be banned. And author Salman Rushdie discusses his new memoir about the murderous knife attack that changed his life.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
It was the second day of testimony in former President Trump's criminal hush money trial in New York City. On the witness stand today, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, who described a 2015 agreement with Donald Trump to try to kill negative stories about him and run negative stories about his political rivals. William Brangham joins us now with more. So, William, the judge now has to rule on Mr. Trump's behavior outside the courtroom. Is that right?
That's right, Jeff. Today began with a very tense hearing over whether the former president has been violating the gag order that was imposed on him after...
There are real-world consequences. Judge Mershon knew it, and he issued that order with that explanation.
Mary McCord of Georgetown, thank you so much as always.
My pleasure.
The U.S. Supreme Court today heard arguments in the case that could have major implications for labor rights. The court looked at a challenge brought by Starbucks against a lower court decision to reinstate 7 baristas in Memphis who were fired by the company after they announced plans to unionize. Washington Post labor reporter Lauren Kaori-Gurley is with us. She was at the court today and has been following this case. Thanks so much for being with us. So, Lauren, walk us through the arguments that the justices heard today and how this is all linked to the Starbucks union dispute.
When workers in the United States unionize, if they are retaliated against by their employers, the National Labor Relations Board, the federal agency that oversees...
high-stakes case out of Idaho, looking at access to emergency abortions. We'll have the latest on what's shaping up to be a busy final week of the court's argument calendar. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi hopes to secure a third term in elections that are now underway. His promise, a rising united India. But in India's northeast, a state is at war with itself. Hundreds are dead, tens of thousands are displaced, and the central government is accused of looking the other way. Producer Zeba Varsi got rare access to the deeply divided state of Manipur. And a warning, some details in her report are disturbing.
It feels like a militarized border between two warring countries, but it's a road between two they've been neglected. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Zeba Varsi in Manipur, India.
TikTok might soon be banned or under new ownership in the U.S. That's with the U.S. Senate expected to approve legislation as part of a $95 billion foreign aid package. But TikTok doesn't plan to go down without a fight. Lisa Desjardins has more.
Jeff, this bill is unprecedented in scope. The legislation forces TikTok, whose parent company is David McKay with the New York Times. Thank you.
Thank you.
August 12th, 2022. Salman Rushdie, one of the world's best-known writers, was attacked and nearly killed by a young man with a knife. Now, Rushdie has written of that harrowing day and all that's followed in a new book. And he recently spoke to our Jeffrey Brown for our arts and culture series, Canvas.
As we sit here a little more than a year and a half after the attack, how are you?
I'm, surprisingly good. Surprising to myself. It will continue to grow. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in New York.
And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for joining us and have a good evening.
Direct. Don't miss out on this comprehensive lunchtime news roundup.
Join me for Paris Direct every French lunchtime on France 24.
With the war in Gaza now passing 200 days, much of the enclave is barely recognizable. A groups warn a ground offensive on Rafah would create an apocalyptic situation. The US Justice Department awards almost $139 million to more than 100 victims of Larry Nassar in a settlement after survivors accused the FBI of failing to investigate the crimes of the former Team USA gymnastics doctor. And the top US diplomat Antony Blinken heads for talks in China at a time when the world's top two economies are engaged in numerous disputes. Tensions heightened recently with the discovery of alleged spies in Europe accused of passing sensitive information to Beijing. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Alexander Wilcott. In over 200 days, the residents of Gaza Strip have had their lives turned upside down, both literally and figuratively, with vast areas reduced to rubble. Some 1.5 million Palestinians are seeking refuge in Rafah, on the southern edge of the enclave. Aid groups warn a ground offensive now would be catastrophic. Lauren Berstecker has a look at the latest from the ground.
Gutted buildings on the verge of collapse, piles of rubble and debris, and residents trying to salvage what little they can. This is all that's left of the northern Gaza town of Jabalia, 200 days after the start of the Israeli offensive.
We don't have money, we don't have anything. 80% of all life in Gaza has stopped. All the houses and buildings are destroyed.
According to the UN, more than 70% of residential buildings and 80% of civilian infrastructure in Gaza have been destroyed by Israeli bombardments. The IDF regularly publishes videos of strikes supposedly targeting Hamas fighters. Yet, despite its assurances, Israel has shown little concern for collateral damage, as shown by the scope of the destruction and the mounting civilian casualties. Over 34,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. More than half were women and children. Sabrine al-Sakani was 7 months pregnant when she and her husband were killed in an airstrike. Doctors performed an emergency C-section and were able to save the baby, who is now fighting for her life.
She still has trouble breathing. We're watching her, waiting for her to stabilize.
She's the daughter of my dear son. I will take care of her.
In the southern city of Rafah, over 1.5 million Palestinians who fled the fighting are now trapped between Israeli bombs and the closed Egyptian border. Most are trying their best to get by and forget for a few hours at least the horrors of the war.
We hope that the war will end soon, so we can go back to our normal lives.
The Israeli government remains intent on launching a wide-scale ground offensive on Rafah, which it describes as the last pocket of Hamas resistance in Gaza, an operation which humanitarian actors fear could turn into a bloodbath.
Pro-Palestinian movements continue to spring up at US universities despite attempts to shut them down amid concerns of anti-Semitism. Protests have been simmering for months, but the heat was really turned up last week when 100 demonstrators were arrested at the Ivy League school Columbia in New York. Our correspondent Jessica Missouri tells us more.
Pro-Palestinian student protesters have moved their demonstration here to Washington Square Park this Tuesday. This comes after an encampment that they had set up on the premises of New York University was raided by police on Monday evening. More than 100 protesters were arrested.
They arrested us, they put us on a big bus. There were, I believe, 4 buses, at which point our hands were zip-tied. One person couldn't feel their hands, and the NYPD wouldn't let her change their cuffs. They wouldn't loosen them.
I'm here to support my students and to support my colleagues and to make demands on the administration that the administration divest from Israel and from weapons manufacturers, that it close down the apartheid campus in Tel Aviv, and that it stop misusing what are supposed to be protections against discrimination to shut down dissent.
But to me, the movement that comes to mind is the anti-apartheid movement. I see what's happening now. The primary demand that the students are making at NYU and in most campuses is divestment. And divestment is about direct university institutional complicity in an apartheid regime.
If you're threatened, if someone is looking at you aggressively, that was the worst thing that happened. No one threw anything at us. It was a peaceful, from what I saw. I didn't see anything violent.
Well, if you look at history in the 1960s, students organized to demand that the U.S. pull out of Vietnam and the U.S.-Vietnam War, and it was a result of mass student organizing that then shifted national politics and indeed resulted in the U.S. accelerating its withdrawal of troops from Vietnam.
We're not going to quit until all of our demands are met. We're going to keep coming out, showing out, protest demonstrations, whatever we need to do until all of our demands are met and until we see a free Palestine.
Many of the student protesters are paranoid about showing their faces. They say that they have been doxxed by infiltrators and they don't feel safe revealing their identities.
Now, the US Justice Department has agreed to pay almost $139 million in settlements to over 100 victims of Larry Nassar, the USA gymnastics team doctor who used his position to abuse young female athletes. Survivors accused the FBI of failing to investigate their claims against him. The former gymnast-turned-lawyer Rachel Den Hollander was the first to publicly accuse Nassar and welcomed the outcome.
I'm deeply grateful. Accountability with the Justice Department has been a long time in coming. Their failures allowed over 100 children to continue being abused, and it is right and just that a measure of accountability has come. But I think it's also important to recognize that this is the first step. The failures that we see happening with the FBI and the Justice Department really are just a blown-up picture of what's happening all over the country to survivors that don't have press coverage.
Now, there have been clashes in the Haitian capital as the authorities try to wrestle control of the capital back from armed gangs that control around 80% of Port-au-Prince. The authorities are pushing to hold a swearing-in ceremony for a new administration at the presidential palace as a show of force, despite threats and daily gunfire in the area. Now, 5 migrants, including a 7-year-old girl, have died while trying to cross the English Channel from France, just hours after Britain passed a bill to deport illegal immigrants to Rwanda. The British government says the plan, which has spent 2 years clearing legal hurdles, will act as a deterrent and avert such tragedies. 112 people had set off from northern France before dawn, but the engines soon broke down, leaving them stranded in the icy waters. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is heading to Shanghai and Beijing for 3 days of talks with top Chinese officials as US-China ties are hitting a critical point. His visit also comes amid rising concern in Europe over Chinese espionage, with several suspected spies detained in Germany and the UK. Selena Sykes has the story.
As the US's top diplomat heads to China in a bid to improve fractured ties, concerns are on the rise in the West over Chinese espionage. The arrests of several suspected spies in Germany and the UK have made the headlines this week. Though cyber attacks from afar are a much bigger concern for governments. China is the country behind the most cyber attacks in the world, ahead of Russia. Beijing was responsible for 240 state-affiliated attacks between 2005 and 2023, according to the European Repository of Cyber Incidents. The US is China's most sought-after target, as Beijing tries to disrupt its rival superpower's economy, national security, and politics.
China is trying to cheat its way into the top of industries in the 21st century. Intellectual property they don't subsidize or buy through shell companies their cyber spies will steal. The scale of the theft is just staggering. A survey of chief financial officers estimates that 1 in 5 US corporations has had their IP stolen.
But Beijing is increasingly setting its sights beyond the US to Europe. In 2021, 30% of German companies said they had been attacked from China. That figure rose to 43% just a year later. Attacks that are proving costly. While not entirely from Beijing, cyber attacks are estimated to have left German companies 223 billion euros out of pocket, or 6% of the country's GDP in 2021. Concerns over cyber espionage have pushed both the US and the EU to take out measures against several big Chinese companies in recent years, such as Huawei and TikTok, while increasing protection of technologies with the highest risk of being misused, including AI, genetic engineering, and microchips.
Those are all our top headlines this hour, but do stay tuned to France 24. We next head to the debate with François Picard.
On this Tuesday night, charges in a made-in-Canada conspiracy.
It's an international conspiracy that actually took place in Montreal.
A plot to sell Chinese military equipment to Libya and a manhunt for one of the accused.
Both individuals could have received millions of dollars in commission.
Why the chief of one of Canada's largest police forces met Sri Lanka's top cop, a man labelled a torturer.
Almost disbelief to see these kind of images.
Catch and kill the former publisher of the National Enquirer on how he made up stories and killed others to protect Donald Trump's reputation. And catching the scent of PTSD.
Dogs will often signal there's a problem before the person knows.
Canadian dogs working to sniff out trauma.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a Canadian connection to conspiracy charges involving China and Libya. The RCMP has charged 2 men with conspiring to sell Chinese drones and other military equipment to Libya in violation of international sanctions. They are both former employees of the International Civil Aviation Organization, a UN agency based in Montreal. One man is in custody and his alleged accomplice is the subject of an international arrest warrant. In our top story tonight, Mike Armstrong breaks down what they're accused of and how much money was involved.
It was early Tuesday morning at this home just outside Montreal that RCMP officers swept in. The man they arrested, 61-year-old Fatih Mawik, is charged with conspiracy. The whereabouts of his co-accused, 37-year-old Mahmoud Saya, police say are unknown.
We've issued a Canada-wide warrant for his arrest, but also an Interpol red notice because he's a Libyan national and we have no idea where he is right now.
Now, the 2 men were for a time employees at the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. The RCMP says it was during their time at the UN agency that the pair worked out a plan to sell Chinese military equipment to Libya. In return, Libya would have sold oil to China. Between 2018 and 2021, the 2 men were allegedly trying to use foreign companies as a front to get around international sanctions. According to police, this is the man the plot was supposed to help. Libyan General Khalifa Haftar and his 6 sons control much of the eastern part of Libya. His forces tried to overthrow the UN-backed Tripoli government, but didn't succeed. But if Haftar's Libyan National Army takes more of the country, he'd have more control over oil exports. The 2 former ICAO employees would have been the middleman.
Had this deal gone through, it is theorized that both individuals could have received millions of dollars in commission on a monthly basis.
In a statement, ICAO says the 2 men left the organization a number of years ago and that it is cooperating with investigators. In fact, police say as employees at the UN organization, both men had a sort of diplomatic immunity. They couldn't be investigated or arrested until ICAO agreed to it. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
There are questions about the judgment of the chief of one of Canada's largest police forces. While on vacation in Sri Lanka, the chief of Ontario's Peel Regional Police met with the Inspector General of Sri Lanka's police, a man who the country's Supreme Court has found personally participated in torture. The chief was photographed with him multiple times in uniform during what Peel Regional Police describe as a personal trip. The UN Human Rights Commissioner has warned of a human rights crisis in Sri Lanka and a crackdown on dissent. Turia Isri reports on the meeting and the reaction.
We, as a police jurisdiction...
Nishan Duriappa has led Peel officers for the last 5 years, policing Mississauga, Brampton, and Pearson Airport. But a visit back to his birthplace of Sri Lanka is raising questions about judgment.
It's one of almost disbelief to see these kind of images.
Duriappa was photographed in uniform last December next to this man, Deshabandhu Tennakoon, the Inspector General of Sri Lankan Police. Just 2 weeks earlier, that country's Supreme Court ruled Tennakoon was involved in the brutal arrest and torture of a man.
Not just overseeing torture, not just his subordinates were torturing. He was present in the room when these things took place.
Peel Regional Police would not answer questions about the meeting, or when Duriappa learned of the High Court's ruling.
Outside of Sri Lanka, the largest Sri Lankan population is in Canada.
Sri Lankan police have a long history of human rights violations, including concerns from the United Nations about a sweeping anti-drug crackdown.
So many red flags went up for me.
Rathika Sitsabayisan was Canada's first Tamil MP and grew up in Peel Region. She wants the police chief to apologize.
You have your official uniform, looks like you're getting an official salute. All of those things look very official, look very formal, and not like a personal visit to go see my family's ancestral home.
The Peel Regional Police Chief declined our request for an interview. In a statement, a spokesperson said Duriappa was invited to meet with senior police leaders in Sri Lanka and discuss those requests ahead of time with Global Affairs Canada and the RCMP. When we reached out to both agencies, they said they did not organize the visit. The Mounties added they had informed the Peel Chief about the recent Supreme Court ruling against the Inspector General. Turia Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
There were more revelations today from the former publisher of the National Enquirer. David Pecker is the prosecution's first witness at former President Donald Trump's trial. A longtime friend of Trump, Pecker described how he agreed to suppress negative stories about Trump. His catch and kill strategy involved paying sources for negative stories about Trump to take them off the market so they'd never run. Neetu Garcha is at the courthouse in New York. Neetu.
Yeah, that's right, Donna. The testimony today from the man known as the tabloid king shed light on the murky origins of Trump's path from political newcomer to president of the United States.
The former National Enquirer publisher testified about how he agreed to help Trump. Pecker told the court, "I said I would be your eyes and ears." He testified Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen would call him and suggest a negative article to run about political opponents. Referring to Cohen, Pecker said, quote, "He would send me information about Ted Cruz or about Ben Carson or Marco Rubio, and that was the basis of our story, and then we would embellish it."
I think cross-examination is going to be telling. So far, these have just been softball questions.
Before testimony resumed Tuesday, arguments were heard in the allegations the former president violated a gag order.
I'd love to talk to you people. I'd love to say everything that's on my mind. But I'm restricted because I have a gag order.
I don't see how he's complaining about the gag order when he's violated it at every possible turn.
Prosecutors say Trump has violated the order, banning him from publicly attacking witnesses and jurors multiple times. After his lawyer argued Trump is trying hard to comply with the order, the judge blasted the attorney, saying, "You're losing all credibility with this court." No ruling was issued, and the judge didn't indicate when he would.
The case is a sham.
Trump, disappointed at the low turnout of support outside, once again encouraged people to protest peacefully outside the court.
For great Americans, people that want to come down and they want to protest at the court, and they want to protest peacefully.
Any mass protests he may have envisioned have failed to materialize.
And on Thursday, the Supreme Court is set to hear the ex-president's immunity claim over his efforts to undo his 2020 election loss, as this courtroom saga continues to draw attention and potentially the broader political narrative ahead of the 2024 election. Donna?
Neetu Garcha in New York, thanks. As Donald Trump's legal bills pile up, he just got $1.2 billion richer. The former U.S. president got an earn-out bonus of 36 million shares in his newly public company, Trump Media and Technology Group. It was part of an incentive that was created for the company's market debut in March. According to a regulatory filing, Trump is entitled to the bonus if the company's shares trade above $17.50 for 20 out of any 30 trading days over the next 3 years. Today marks its 20th trading day, so even though the share price fell 8% today, Trump qualifies for those bonus shares. The U.S. Justice Department has agreed to pay close to $139 million to survivors of former U.S. gymnastics team Dr. Larry Nassar. The payout settles a lawsuit over the FBI's mishandling of credible complaints of sexual assault. Had they been taken seriously, dozens of assaults could have been prevented. More than 150 women and girls, including Olympic athletes, have said Nassar sexually abused them under the guise of performing medical treatment. Nassar is serving up to 175 years in prison. Police in the U.S. are scrambling to defuse protests over the war in Gaza at a handful of elite university campuses. Police broke up a protest at New York University in Manhattan overnight, arresting about 130 students. Nearby Columbia University canceled in-person classes on Monday in response to protesters setting up a massive tent encampment there. Demonstrations have also taken place at campuses in Minnesota and California. Since October 7th, U.S. universities have struggled to balance student safety with free speech. The White House has condemned anti-Semitic incidents that have marred some of the demonstrations. After months of delays, the United States Senate voted overwhelmingly in favor of approving a $95 billion aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Most of that money, nearly $61 billion, is destined for Ukraine. It's to pay for much-needed military equipment, including ammunition and air defenses, as the Russian army makes steady gains in eastern Ukraine. $26 billion is allocated to assistance to Israel and humanitarian support for Gaza. The measure is expected to land on the president's desk soon, and President Biden has promised to sign it into law.
One of the central lessons of the war in Ukraine is that we need deeper stockpiles of munitions, and we'll provide them with the largest ever package of UK military equipment.
That is Britain's Prime Minister promising more support for Ukraine, over $850 million in additional funding for Kyiv, on top of more than $4 billion already allocated this year. Rishi Sunak met with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in Poland, which shares a long border with Ukraine and is on NATO's eastern flank. With the U.S. approving more military aid for Ukraine, Russia is warning of plans to intensify strikes on Ukrainian facilities storing Western-supplied weapons. Today, Russia also struck the southern city of Odessa, injuring at least 9 people. The drone attack severely damaged a residential area. A number of buildings caught fire. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched 16 drones, which also targeted the capital, Kyiv. All but one of them were shot down. Ukraine is also denying the fall of a village in eastern Ukraine. After weeks of heavy fighting, Russia claims its forces have taken control of the area in Donetsk. Ukraine says its troops still hold up to 20%. Hours after Britain passed a bill to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda, at least 5 people died while trying to cross the English Channel. 47 other people were rescued from an overcrowded inflatable boat. They were en route from France. It's believed 110 people were on board when panic broke out. The English Channel is one of the world's busiest sea lanes. Prime Minister Sunak says he's hoping to deter dangerous crossings like this and destroy the people smuggling business. Can we end plastic pollution? Coming up, thousands descend on Ottawa as plastic pollution treaty talks hit a critical stage. From your cell phone case to food packaging to medical equipment, plastic is all around us, and too much of it ends up in the ocean. In Canada, we dispose of 3 million tons of plastic every year. It's estimated just 9% of that gets recycled. Mackenzie Gray reports on the efforts to turn the tide on a huge environmental problem.
We are here in Ottawa, Canada for the 4th meeting of the negotiations.
That's one of the over 4,000 delegates in the nation's capital here to try and find a solution to a rapidly growing problem. Plastic pollution, figuratively and literally on display outside the conference hall. Ottawa's famous Rideau Canal littered with plastic trash, now a part of the diet for these Canadian geese.
Microplastics are being found deep in our water supply, deep in our soil. They're kind of pervading our entire environment. It's a really big issue.
To solve it, over 170 countries are trying to come up with a legally binding framework through the United Nations to cut down on plastics, particularly in waterways, with the UN estimating 37 million tons of plastic pollution could end up in the ocean every year by 2040.
Right now, it's estimated that each one of us is consuming a credit card worth of plastic every single week.
People just don't want an agreement. They want an ambitious agreement.
Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault announcing $3.3 million to try and deal with the 3 million tons of plastic Canadians toss annually, a drop in the ocean for what's needed, according to this advocacy group.
We need millions, if not billions of dollars, particularly when we start talking about infrastructure, and so there's a long way to go.
Many plastics can't be recycled and almost all never decompose, but single-use plastics like straws and cutlery are cheap to make, and many of their alternatives like cotton or paper grocery bags contribute more emissions, waste, and harmful byproducts during production.
There's a huge gap to close right now, to be honest, and it's going to take, a huge investment from the governments around the world to basically kickstart our divestment from petroleum-based polymers.
Negotiations are set to continue until Monday here in Ottawa, but that likely won't lead to a binding agreement, Donna, with the final round of negotiations set for South Korea in November.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray, thanks. Options for cooling the Earth ahead, the polarizing technology that could slow climate change. Can or should humans tinker with the Earth's atmosphere to address global warming? That's the debate surrounding a technology called stratospheric aerosol injection. The idea is to use planes to pump sulfur dioxide into the upper reaches of the atmosphere. It's a chemical compound that blocks the heating effects of the sun. Eric Sorensen explains the technology and why it's controversial.
That gas will reach the Earth's stratosphere. In one of the most powerful eruptions in modern history, Mount Pinatubo discharged 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide that circled the planet and reflected sunlight, dropping global temperatures half a degree Celsius in the early 1990s. It was a revelation for future climate scientists.
Everybody knows that sulfur works. A very small amount of aerosols can have a large effect.
Humans have caused the same effect from the sulfur emissions of ocean vessels that create cloud tracks across the sky, reflecting the sun.
Imagine now deliberate stratospheric aerosol injection, planes or balloons dispersing sulfur to screen out some solar radiation. Now, most of the sun's heat would still reach the Earth, but a tiny bit would be reflected high in the stratosphere, cooling the planet. It would work best over the polar regions where the effects of warming are the greatest, and it is controversial.
It breaks a taboo against messing with nature.
Wake Smith has written Pandora's Toolbox, The Hopes and Hazards of Climate Intervention.
We certainly need to explore the costs and benefits of it to enable future generations to make an informed choice in that regard.
One startup has met resistance just sending up balloons with sulfur dioxide. U.S. atmospheric authorities have done only limited test flights. And Scopex, a Harvard University atmospheric program, was blocked in Sweden by indigenous and environmental opponents. The program was shut down last month.
It's very difficult to get a lot of research on geoengineering done.
This expert says to stop melting Arctic ice and rising sea levels, this science should at least be tested. But which countries get to decide to change the atmosphere? And once it starts, could you ever stop injecting aerosols?
That's how complex this type of planetary climate intervention technology is. It's not just a science experiment. If this works, this could remake the face of the planet.
And yet, what if the climate is that much worse decades from now?
It's not at all clear to me that future people will reject engineered climate relative to runaway climate change.
An engineered climate is science fiction today, but will it someday be necessary? Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
There's an unusual story out of Belgium. A man was acquitted of drunk driving because he has an extremely rare medical condition that makes his body produce alcohol. It's called autobrewery syndrome, or ADS. It's believed only 20 people have been diagnosed with it. It can produce the same type of alcohol as found in alcoholic drinks, but people with it generally feel the effects less. Patients can present with symptoms, though, consistent with drunkenness, such as slurred speech, stumbling, and loss of motor functions. Dogs detecting trauma next. How dogs can sniff out PTSD flashbacks. William and Catherine's littlest prince is growing up. Louis turned 6 today. To mark the occasion, this photo, taken by his mother, was released along with the message, "Happy 6th birthday, Prince Louis. Thank you for all the kind wishes today." Kensington Palace says the photo was taken in Windsor in the last few days and point out it has not been edited. If you're a dog lover, you know they can have an uncanny knack for reading your mood and cheering you up when you're not feeling your best. Some dogs can even sense oncoming symptoms of emotional trauma. Heidi Petracek reports on a groundbreaking Canadian study that backs that up.
Ivy, the red gold retriever, is seeking out a specific scent. Trained to hold her nose over the cone that conceals a breath sample from a person experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
Dogs will often signal there's a problem before the person knows.
The results of the Dalhousie University pilot study recently published in the journal Frontiers in Allergy.
We were having people who had traumatic experiences come into the lab to tell us about their trauma stories.
Basically, we got the dogs to smell masks that these people were wearing during their interviews.
They collected samples from 26 people when they were feeling stressed and when they were calm. Ivy and a German shepherd named Callie completed the work using their powerful sense of smell to detect what are called volatile organic compounds. Their noses had a 90% accuracy rate.
Within the same individual, they can tell when that person is stressed versus not.
And each dog could even sniff out distinct emotions associated with PTSD flashbacks.
One dog seemed to respond to anxiety and fear kind of reactions from the humans, whereas the other dog seemed to react more to shame.
For Army veteran Kim Ginjal, the study's results make perfect sense.
I owe her so much, it's not even funny.
She's always felt her dog, Omega, has sensed her PTSD symptoms were about to flare up even before she did.
I knew her more, and she knew more about me than I think anybody else in the world.
The team at Dalhousie University hope the results mean scent detection will be added to service dog training to create a canine-powered early warning system for PTSD sufferers, leading to earlier treatment. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is Burnt Coat, Nova Scotia. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
This is Asia First.
Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. here in Singapore. I'm Julie Yu. Our top story this hour. The UN called for an international investigation into reports of mass graves at 2 Gaza hospitals. Palestinian authorities say they found hundreds of bodies in Khan Yunis following the withdrawal of Israeli troops. Israel says claims that its military forces buried bodies are baseless and unfounded.
Hospitals are entitled to very special protection under international humanitarian law. And let's be clear, the intentional killing of civilians, detainees, and others who are of the combat is a war crime.
I'm Arnold Gay. Also this morning, the U.S. Senate votes overwhelmingly to advance a key package of bills with a global focus.
The yeas are 80, the nays are 19.
Aid for Taiwan, Israel, and Ukraine bundled with a potential TikTok ban, and it passed the upper chamber as soon as today in a rare sign of agreement between Democrats and Republicans.
In a resounding bipartisan vote, the relentless work of 6 long months has paid off. Congress is sending the supplemental to President Biden's desk.
South Korea's junior doctor strike standoff deepens. A group of medical professors at major hospitals now say they will resign, fueling concerns over further disruption to the country's healthcare system.
I'm Liz Bucknell with your business news. Tesla reports its biggest decline in revenue in more than a decade as it misses analyst estimates. The shares jump in extended trade after CEO Elon Musk tells investors that production of new affordable EV models could begin sooner than expected. Plus, Japan issues the strongest intervention warning so far as the yen sinks to another new low against greenback.
The United Nations is calling for an international probe into reports of mass graves at Gaza's 2 biggest hospitals.
The Al-Shifa and Nasser facilities were destroyed recently by Israel, which has dismissed the latest allegations as baseless and unfounded.
The UN's human rights chief is expressing horror and warned that war crimes might have been committed as Israel's war on the Strip entered its 200th day yesterday.
We are stressing the need for international investigations. There's a history here of impunity for gross violations, and so many of them have gone undetected and unreported on. So we feel the need to raise the alarm because clearly there have been multiple bodies discovered. We don't know how many. There are reports that some of them had their hands tied, which of course indicates the serious violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law.
While uncovering grisly finds at Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza, the civil defense said that it has found more than 340 bodies in a temporary burial ground, believing the people were killed during a siege and raid by Israeli troops. And over at the Al-Shifa, the WHO and local officials have been discovering bodies since Israeli troops left earlier this month. The latest reports say around 30 bodies were found buried in 2 graves in the courtyard, including women and older people.
Soldiers attacked Al-Shifa last month. Israel has been targeting hospitals, accusing Hamas of using them as cover for their command centers. The UN is alarmed because hospitals have special protection under international law. The United States has voiced concern about the reports of mass graves.
We have seen those reports, and the reports are incredibly troubling, and we're inquiring on this with the government of Israel.
The UN is also calling for a probe into attacks on its relief agency in Gaza. UNRWA is the biggest aid provider here. Its chief says 180 staff have been killed, 160 premises damaged, and at least 400 people killed while seeking protection under the UN flag. This comes amid tensions with Israel over claims that UNRWA staff were involved in the October 7th attacks.
I also called on the member of the Security Council for an independent investigation and accountability for the blatant disregard of UN premises, UN staff, and UN operation also in the Gaza Strip.
The U.S. Senate has advanced a $95 billion wartime aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan after 6 months of political wrangling.
In a final tally of 80 to 19, the crucial procedural vote passed with wide bipartisan support, putting it on track for final congressional approval. Now, if the Senate passes the package in its final vote, the legislation will head to President Biden's desk to be signed into law. But the exact timing remains a question. Lawmakers have up to 30 hours to debate the package. President Biden, who said he will immediately sign the bill, has urged the Senate to quickly advance the measures to his desk.
The legislation includes around $61 billion to replenish Ukraine's war chest as it seeks to repel Russia from its territory, and $26 billion for Israel and humanitarian relief for citizens in conflict zones, including Gaza, and $8 billion for the Indo-Pacific region to bolster its defenses against China.
The Senate sends a unified message to the entire world. America will always defend democracy in its hour of need. We tell our allies, we will stand with you. We tell our adversaries, don't mess with us.
American prosperity and security are the products of decades of American leadership. Our global interests come with global responsibilities.
Nick Harper has more on the proceedings on the 4 separate bills, including one that could set the stage for social media app TikTok's nationwide ban.
It has been something of a tricky day in the Senate, as we heard there from both the Democrat majority leader and the Republican minority leader. They both want to get things done as quickly as possible. However, some roadblocks were thrown up. Some progressive Democrats and some hard-right Republicans wanted to have some amendments made to these bills. However, that 18-19 vote was to prevent any of those amendments being put in place. So on the left, Bernie Sanders wanted amendments limiting the amount of money going to Israel's, he said, war machine. He also wanted to remove a block on funding going to the UN's Palestinian agency, UNRWA. And then on the right, some hard-right Republicans were looking to try and put some amendments in place to try and prevent some of the funding going to Ukraine. However, we're told from the White House that the Pentagon is already assembling the first shipment to go to Ukraine, even though this bill has not yet passed. About $1 billion of aid are being prepared. It includes heavy weaponry, air defences, even armoured vehicles. And there are those three bills, one for Israel, one for the conflict in Ukraine, and of course also for the Indo-Pacific, but a fourth bill as well, looking to put more sanctions on Russia and a potential ban on TikTok if the Chinese owner ByteDance doesn't sell the company in the next year. So another passage of that bill, because we could see all of this pass later on tonight, or at the very latest at some point.
You've got the best deals on delicious food. Order now.
Food Panda! Food Panda!
Around the country. Since Friday, police have arrested hundreds of students at Columbia, Yale, and NYU after some set up unauthorized tent encampments to press their demands. Students are calling for ceasefire in Gaza and universities to divest from companies with ties to Israel.
What is going on is just so it's just wrong, and Columbia's active involvement and it's unapologetic nature of going about supporting arresting students. It's not the vibe.
It's very frustrating to feel like they don't have a plan for what they're doing. They're just kind of trying to do anything possible to tamp down student peaceful protests, but it just keeps making everything more tense.
And the White House says it's closely monitoring the situation at college campuses. It notes that people have the right to publicly protest, but not resort to physical intimidation or calls for violence, citing what it calls alarming rhetoric. Well, senior Republican senators are calling on President Biden to send in federal law enforcement officers to curb the protests. Here's Nick Harper again on why it's unlikely Mr. Biden will do so, despite the mounting pressure.
The moment he is putting a pause on that plan. He himself has called the protests anti-Semitic, and of course there are local police forces like the New York police force that has been dealing with this, arresting more than 100 people, but this would be a considerable step up, sending federal law enforcement officers to these sites to break up the camps. Now, there was a letter written by 25 Republicans calling for this to happen and saying that the protesters were not only anti-Semitic but also pro-terrorist mobs. We also heard from the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell calling on Biden to act immediately to restore order on college campuses. We know that the House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican, will be traveling to New York later on Wednesday, visiting the Columbia University and meeting with Israeli students there. We're told that he's going to be speaking about the troubling rise of virulent anti-Semitism. Of course, lots of attention on the president of Columbia. Calls on both sides, from Democrats and Republicans, for her to step down. If she does, she would be the latest high-profile president at one of the major universities in the US to fall on her sword, after we saw the presidents at the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard do exactly that just a few months ago.
A group of medical professors at major South Korean hospitals say they will resign in the next few days as the nation continues to grapple with its healthcare crisis. An emergency committee representing the group added that some hospitals will suspend all surgeries and treatment for outpatients once a week. And the group earlier announced plans to have a day off next week and are set to discuss having more such breaks on a regular basis. And the latest development comes amid a prolonged walkout by trainee doctors in protest at the government's plan to boost the number of medical students without first improving their pay and working conditions. The doctors say the walkout has taken a toll on the thinly stretched workforce. The second health vice minister, Kang Min-soo, is urging the medical community to stop their collective action and instead join a special committee to reform the country's medical system. It's set to launch this week. In the meantime, as South Korean media outlets report, some hospitals have already decided not to serve outpatients on Fridays starting this week. Other details, including when the move is set to kick in, are expected to depend on the situation of each hospital.
Investigations are underway in Malaysia after two Navy helicopters collided in mid-air during a training session. 10 people died in the incident. The aircraft were taking part in a rehearsal yesterday for a now-cancelled naval parade in the state of Perak. Melissa Go with this report.
A rehearsal for a fly-past in conjunction with the Malaysian Navy 90th anniversary went horrifyingly wrong when 2 of the 7 helicopters involved in a formation exercise collided in mid-air and went into a deadly tailspin before crashing onto the ground, killing all 10 Navy crew on board. Now, it's the first such collision involving Malaysian Navy, although helicopter crashes has happened in the past. Now, Defence Minister Khalid Nordin, in speaking to CNA at the Ministry open house on Tuesday afternoon, said he was shocked by the tragic incident.
Of course, it is something unexpected, a very sad incident. We will form an inquiry team to look into what happened.
One of the helicopters, he said, crashed into the Navy Sports Stadium, while another hit a nearby swimming pool. A swimmer escaped with minor injuries. Now, while preliminary investigation is still ongoing by the military and the Director General of Airworthiness, it was revealed that one of the helicopters, AW139, only joined rehearsal for the first time this morning. The aircraft is said to be barely 3 years old, and it was used by the Navy to strengthen its capabilities in the eastern command off Sabah coast to deter kidnapping and smuggling activities. The Fennec helicopter, meanwhile, had 3 rehearsals prior to the collision. Now, speaking after visiting the victims' families at the Lumut Naval Base Hospital in Perak, the Defence Minister said his ministry will extend all help necessary. The body crew will be sent to the Ipoh Hospital for post-mortem before being released to the families. Now, the Navy's 90th anniversary celebration, slated for this Friday, has been cancelled. A mass has to be held instead. Melissa Go, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Officials in Baltimore are preparing to open a fourth, deeper channel for commercial ships to access the city's port for a few days.
Well, the corridor is struggling with normal activity after the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge last month. Cleanup efforts are ongoing to remove the debris.
Members of Unified Command are literally pulling steel from the water with active vessels moving around them. And these boats are in such close quarters to our salvage team that they can literally feel the vibrations. When these ships move by, as the water shifts, so does the wreckage, because we have to understand the enormity and the size of these ships.
Meanwhile, the city of Baltimore has sued the owner and operator of the Dali container vessel. They allege that the companies caused the collapse of the bridge with their carelessness, negligence, and recklessness, resulting in an unseaworthy ship. The city also accused the owners of employing an incompetent crew with equipment and systems not fit for voyages. And still ahead, Asian markets extend a U.S. rally in tech heavyweights as investors digest a raft of earnings reports, including EV maker Tesla's. Plus, California's ambitious plan to decarbonize the trucking industry. We'll find out how the U.S. state is trying to become the truck stop of the 21st century.
CNA.
With Virginia Trioli, Tuesday on ABC TV and ABC iView.
A national crisis. State and federal governments react to the murder of Molly Ticehurst, allegedly killed at the hands of her ex-partner.
This is a crisis in this country, and women don't feel...
ASIO and the AFP take on social media companies, accusing them of spreading disinformation and extremism. Some hope on the horizon, as data suggests the rate of rental price growth is slowing. And we're going to bring you the latest inflation data, set to be released in about half an hour. Hello and welcome to Mornings. I'm Gemma Vaness. And taking a look at today's weather for our capital cities now. Mostly sunny in Brisbane, Sydney and Canberra. There's a shower or two in Melbourne, a chilly top of just 16. Hobart, partly cloudy after some early showers. Cloudy in Adelaide. Mostly sunny in Perth, 24 the top there. And Darwin expecting a shower or two. The Australian market is trading higher ahead of key inflation figures. The All Ords is up 0.5%, and we're going to check these figures in more detail soon with Alicia Barry. The Federal Minister for Women says Australia is in the midst of a crisis and women don't feel safe in this country in the wake of the murder of 28-year-old Molly Ticehurst. The Orange local court yesterday heard 29-year-old Daniel Billings was on bail for charges for violent offences against Ms Ticehurst, including rape, when the alleged murder took place. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns will today announce details of an urgent review into the state's bail laws as the Central West town of Forbes mourns the loss of a much-loved mother and childcare worker. Katie Gallagher says reflection and hard conversations need to take place.
This year's a tough year, but so was last year and the year before that. I mean, this is a crisis in this country, and women don't feel safe. And I think anybody who has women in their lives acknowledges, I think how women feel about this in particular. And, when we see, it's not safe to go out for a run, go shopping, you take action against violent perpetrators, you do all the right things, and we still have these cases. And I don't think there's one easy answer. There's not one government that can solve it, because the problem is deeper than that, and it requires all of us. And it requires, I think, a conversation with men about what's happening and relationships with women and, supporting women in this country.
Our reporter Hugh Hogan is in Forbes.
We were out at the scene this morning. We saw some friends and family laying flowers and cards at the crime scene of where Miss Molly Ticehurst was allegedly murdered. So shocked and sadness would be the first one. There was a quiet reflection last night here held at the Anglican Church for anyone who wanted to take a moment. But following on from the shock and sadness is a real sense of injustice for many in the community. We've heard since the news that the accused, Daniel Billings, was on bail for other violent offences against Miss Ticehurst, that there's anger that the system has somehow let them down. We also heard from the Forbes Mayor, Phyllis Miller, who powerfully stated that women in regional Australia are very unsafe at the moment.
I'm determined as a mayor to protect my community. It is not safe for women to live in rural and regional New South Wales. We are not safe. We cannot hide like you can in the metropolitan areas. Everyone knows everyone and they know where everyone is.
Hugh, how is the New South Wales government planning to address this?
Yeah, we have heard from the Premier, Chris Minns, and the Attorney General, who are expected to make an announcement this morning that it will involve a review into this specific case and the bail system as a whole. We're quite light on details about how this review will take place, how wide-ranging it will be, but we are expecting an announcement from Chris Minns later today. But here's what he had to say last night on this upcoming review.
There's legitimate questions as to how this happened. We have them too, and we know that the public want answers. In relation to changes to the law, we need to understand what happened in the immediate run-up to this alleged crime.
So I guess here in Forbes, people are still just coming to terms with this shocking alleged crime that happened in the early hours of Monday morning, and with that review coming up, hopefully some of those questions are answered.
25 women have died in gendered violence in Australia so far this year, according to campaigners. The Chief Executive of Domestic Violence in New South Wales, Delia Donovan, says solutions must be found. We want to see the nation step up and take action, and our government step up and take action. We want more than words now. We want more than plans. We want to see action. We want to see accountability, and accountability is going to be key. And as a nation, we all have a role to play. Certainly with the pledge we launched a couple of months ago, it's about everyone stepping up and not thinking domestic violence is over there. It doesn't involve me. It involves every single one of us. We've all got a role to play. What we see, how we act, facing up and educating ourselves about this issue, and knowing even through the criminal justice system, it won't just be bail reform that will work. It will be what does domestic and family violence look like through the courts? How are magistrates responding? How's the criminal justice response responding? And really thinking about what domestic violence looks like, how it plays out, and what does trauma-informed practice look like? How are we risk assessing situations? Are we listening to police when it comes to bail reform? Are we looking at the conditions of bail? Are we, there's so much that I think we need to consider, and there's broader, beyond bail reform or beyond the odd announcement. We need big reform, and we need significant investment in this issue. If this story has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline on 1800-RESPECT, which is 1800-737-732. Australia's top police officer has criticised social media companies for pouring accelerant on the flames of misinformation and extremism on their platforms. The conduct of social media giants has been in the spotlight following the spread of graphic and false posts in the aftermath of 2 stabbing attacks in Sydney. Political reporter Nicole Hegarty has more from Parliament House.
This matter is due to be back before the federal court today. An interim injunction is set to end this evening. X, the rebadged Twitter, has removed some of this material, graphic video footage of the stabbing incident, the stabbing of a Sydney bishop in Wakeley last Monday evening. But the owner of X, Elon Musk, the tech billionaire, remains steadfastly opposed to the principle of somebody having the right to police what is and isn't allowed on the platform. He's accused the government of censorship, and the content does remain online overseas. The government has responded, the Prime Minister labelling Mr. Musk an arrogant billionaire. But in the early hours of this morning, the tech billionaire Elon Musk took to his platform, his account, to say that the Australian people want the truth, and X is the only one standing up for their rights. So this evening, under the current plans, if this matter is in fact brought back this evening as is planned or scheduled, the central focus will be the question of whether the E-Safety Commissioner is able or entitled to enforce her ability to demand certain content fitting this description, like this incident, is removed from platforms, whether that extends beyond Australia's borders to request that content be removed globally across the internet. So that's the key question that will be decided when the matter returns to the federal court.
And let's go to those comments from the Federal Police Commissioner, who's also taken aim at social media. What has he had to say?
Some strong comments here from the AFP Commissioner Reece Kershaw, who will be giving an address at the National Press Club around lunchtime today, alongside the Director General of ASIO, the spy agency, Mike Burgess. These comments go to the fact that the most recent 2 stabbing incidents in Sydney have, in his words, allowed mis and disinformation to spread quite freely, as we've seen, with the misidentification of the perpetrator and the Bondi Junction attacks. He says that Australians, in some cases, are being bewitched by content that is on this platform, and saying that platform is an online cauldron of poison, saying that there needs to be additional steps taken to remove that information from the platforms, saying that in fact a number of these social media companies are pouring fuel on the flames of that poison rather than working to extinguish the embers that surface on those platforms, so allowing that content to spread rather than taking active steps to remove it, Gemma.
Political reporter Nicole Hegarty, thank you. There's some slightly better news for Australian renters this morning, with new data from PropTrack showing that while rents are still rising, the rate of price growth has started to slow. Reporter Michael Rennie is in Brisbane with the details.
Some slight good news, because it's really we're still seeing rents going up across the country, but it could potentially be slowing those increases, because in the year to March 2024, we've seen a 9.1% increase in rents, which equates on average to about $50 per week across the board, across the country. But it's the first time we've seen the rate of rent drop below 10% for the first time in 2 years. So that's some good news, and if that continues, obviously we still see rents going, potentially not rising as much as what we have been seeing. But we're still seeing increases, and that means that the people are doing it tough out there with the cost of living. So a lot of people are looking for cheaper alternatives when it comes to where they live. Some people opting for share houses rather than getting a place of their own, getting into a unit rather than a house. And some people are avoiding the rental market altogether, Gemma, deciding to take the plunge, get themselves a mortgage and buy their own home. Because if you look at the data in terms of what's available out there in terms of renting properties, it's still looking pretty dire out there. 11.3% listings are down 11.3%. And so that stretches back to, we haven't seen data like that since 2010. That's the lowest it's been since 2010, so it shows that it is still pretty bad out there. So that sees a lot of people actually taking that plunge, buying a property. In fact, first-time buyers are up to 20.7% over the last year, dating to February. So yeah, a lot of people taking that plunge, but yes, it's still very tough out there, and people are still having to compromise when it comes to where they live.
Yeah, sure. Right. Michael Rennie, thank you. And every state in Australia has now outlawed or promised to ban rental bidding, where an agent can solicit a rental auction above the original asking price. But the number of prosecutions in South Australia is raising questions about how the laws are enforced and whether they can be effective.
For this family, being rejected from around 30 rental properties has taken a toll.
Yeah, up all night, sick, stressed and worried.
With properties so hard to come by, 3 generations of this South Australian family are now cramming in under one roof.
She was living on her own, and she come and live back with me because of finances, extra support, and there is nothing in the complete western suburbs that I could personally go for alone for me, my son and my dog, at all. No, I have to move out.
The fight for a rental property in Adelaide shows no signs of slowing down.
Just 0.83% of rental properties in Adelaide were vacant, according to the latest statistics, and rents have risen 13.5% in the past 12 months, with the median Adelaide asking price now $590 per week.
With the rental market so competitive, many wannabe renters have taken to offering above the asking price in a bid to find a property. But since last year, it has been illegal for South Australian real estate agents to invite offers above the asking price.
Since September, we've already fined for agents who have done the wrong thing in terms of either not having a fixed price, having ads in that say contact the agent, or all offers considered. That's where we've imposed fines already, and others we have given some warning.
While it's illegal for agents or owners to solicit bids above the asking price, there's nothing to stop it.
After 2 years of challenges, the UK passes controversial bill to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. After weeks and months of legislative back and forths, including a stalemate, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's latest efforts to send some migrants to Rwanda finally won approval from Parliament early Tuesday.
My lords, Rwanda is a safe country that has proven time and again its ability to offer asylum seekers a safe haven and a chance to build a new life. Rwanda has a strong history of providing protection to those that need it and currently hosts over 135,000 refugees and asylum seekers who have found safety and sanctuary there. There are binding provisions in the treaty which place obligations on the government of Rwanda to provide for those relocated under the partnership. And my lords, this is long overdue, but I would also like to put on record my thanks to the officials in the government of Rwanda for all their efforts in delivering this partnership. I beg to move.
Plans to send some asylum seekers to Africa have met with fierce criticism since it was introduced 2 years ago. Ahead of the bill passing, Prime Minister Sunak said flights to Rwanda would take off in July. Rwanda has largely stood back and watched the legal wrangling in Britain over the controversial plan, but it has meticulously prepared for the migrant arrival since June 2022, 2 months after the deal was agreed. Migrant advocates in the UK have vowed to continue the fight against it.
Autism is still little known in Burundi, and autistic children are often hidden away, accused of being spoiled, capricious or possessed. Some rare parents, however, understand the situation and support their children, as does Alice, a mother of 3, one of whom is autistic. Few parents understand this. It takes patience and courage. Some parents get discouraged and hide their children, hiring people to look after them in their bedrooms. The Talita Kum Centre aims to break the taboo. The name in Hebrew means get up and walk, and it helps children to learn and develop. It's about care adapted to the child. The second objective is to support families. And the third objective is to raise awareness throughout the child's environment. Talita Kum aspires to be a centre of excellence on autism. Dr. Melissa Ingabiri of the Sensory Integration Department says the disorder is not really an illness and requires early diagnosis. Early diagnosis really plays an essential role in the management of autism, first and foremost for the children concerned. It enables them to benefit from early and appropriate care, which will improve their skills. The centre was recently chosen as the driving force behind a race between Bujumbura and the Rwandan capital Kigali, organised by cyclists from the Zinduka Club. It was an opportunity to increase public awareness about autism and also to raise funds to support the centre. Despite a groundbreaking 2017 law banning single-use plastics for household and commercial use, Kenya has not quite won its battle with plastic pollution. Its capital, Nairobi, for example, generates some 2,500 tonnes of solid waste every day, a fifth of which is plastic. But now it's going one step further. The National Environment Management Authority, NEMA, has announced a ban on the use of plastic bags for the collection of organic waste, like leftover food. It says that 90 days after the 8th of April, when the notice was first issued, plastic bags will not be allowed at markets. And it adds that all organic waste generated by households, both public and private sector institutions, functions and events, will have to be segregated and placed in 100% biodegradable garbage bags. The Environmental Agency has directed all county governments and private waste services to provide their clients with the bags. The move is likely to increase the cost of garbage collection, particularly for households. At least 16 people have died and 28 others are missing after a migrant boat capsized off the coast of Djibouti. It's the latest tragedy on the perilous so-called Eastern Migration Route from Africa to the Middle East. The International Organization for Migration says 77 people, including children, were on board and that it's assisting local authorities with search and rescue efforts. Every year, tens of thousands of African migrants brave the eastern route across the Red Sea, traveling through war-torn Yemen in the hope of reaching Saudi Arabia, escaping conflict, natural disasters, or just seeking better economic opportunities. Djibouti is the main transit country for people trying to reach Gulf nations, as the distance is about 26 kilometers at its closest point across the sea. Just 2 weeks ago, another boat carrying mainly Ethiopian migrants sank off Djibouti, claiming dozens of lives. They were reportedly trying to return to the Horn of Africa after fleeing Yemen, where thousands of migrants are stranded and trapped.
Hello and welcome to this new episode of Business Africa. I'm India Yoga, your host this week. Here are the headlines. Rwanda emerged as the world's largest exporter of coltan in 2023, surpassing the Democratic Republic of Congo, which nonetheless holds 60 to 80% of the world's reserves. In the race for tourism excellence, Tanzanian startups are calling for concrete government measures to make the tourism industry an economic pillar. And purple tea is gaining more and more popularity, with Kenya seeking to capitalize on the trend. A local company is aiming to position itself in the market and is calling for policies to support growth. You've probably never seen it, but coltan is an essential mineral for our electronic devices. Rwanda has become one of the leading global exporters.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.